Okay. All right, so there's chapter 15 and number 6. Hopefully you guys didn't have to change too much about it. Probably just had to add some stuff. All right, so chapter 16. Chapter 16 is a nice little fluffy chapter. So not a whole lot of graphing going on in chapter 16.
Are we going to make it through international?
Probably a little bit. I expect to anyways. Where is my chapter 16? Where did I put my notes? Oh, maybe I'll have to wing this one. All right, so chapter 16 is all about the public sector. Or how does government spending happen? Where does it change? What moves it? What shakes it? So, government spending and taxing. So technically, one of the things that we worry about is, remember that GDP this formula. You guys have memorized this formula, so you guys can sprout it off if I ask you to. Generally speaking, this component of GDP should not be a large factor of GDP. So government spending does have to be part of GDP because the government collects a whole bunch of your money, and so you hope that they spend it on stuff that's actually going to help you. And the idea is that when they buy goods and services generating GDP, technically it's helping you in some sort of a circular flow method, right? Or they're hiring you and you work for the government, right, like me. Right? So generally speaking, GDP as a percent of government spending, so government spending as a percent of GDP, a good number is somewhere between 20 to 30%, all right? If it's less than 20%, then the government is somehow hoarding all of the money that they're collecting from you. And if it's more than 30%, then probably the government is borrowing more than they probably should, all right? The idea here is that when you're near full employment, government spending should only account for around 20% of GDP, all right? And that as we move towards recessions, it should become a higher percent, right? So the idea, again, being during recessions, we as consumers start to spend less because we don't have the money, and so the government picks up the slack, all right? For the past 3-4 years, GDP, government spending-wise, has been between 35 and 40% of GDP, which just points out how crappy things have been around here lately. Again, not a good or a bad thing, but it is a thing. So if you take a peek at page 346, it gives you a picture of what the percentage of government spending has been compared to GDP over the last, 60, 70, 80 some odd years of our country's history. And I'm obviously not going to try and draw that picture. And again, I don't expect you to memorize that picture either, but it does give you a good hint at how GDP has been compared to government spending, all right? Yeah, it's just a little tree, right? A little showing you where money is. Okay, so now this is where the government gets its money and where it spends its money from. Now, if you look on the next page, pie charts. As soon as you get to pie charts, you know it's relatively interesting, right? So on page 347, it has a pie chart of the spending that the government has been doing, okay? What's the number one thing that the government spends on right now? Defense. Defense. Well, no, that's 1970. Right. Income security. What the heck does that mean? What is income security? Unemployment is built into that. What else is it? What's the number one thing? Social Security, right? So, I mean, the big thing that comes in here is Social Security / pensions and Medicare. So these are the things that are making sure that people, survive, after they've retired. Now, why in 1970 was income security only 22%, but in 2010 income security is 50-some-odd%?
Baby boom. Right?
Yeah.
The baby boom.
Yeah, exactly. So who are we spending all of our money on right now?
Old people.
Old people, right. So if we want to cure our economic woes, if we could just have a good disease go through and wipe out all the old people, this number would go back to being only 22%. All of our problems would be solved. Knock on wood to some degree, right? I mean, obviously that's a slightly morbid and, terrible thing to say, but at the same time, from a strictly monetary perspective, that's where our money's going, right? Our taxes are going to cover all the baby boomers' retirements. That's our job, right? I mean, those of you that are whining and crying about high taxes, just look at your parents and your grandparents and just think, how could I knock them off, right? I mean, because you're going to collect, right? I mean, you're going to collect on whatever sort of inheritance you can get, and then you're not paying for their Social Security anymore, right? Double bonus. Whoa, yeah. Jail. Oh, who's going to quibble over who kills who, right? I mean, okay. So what's next after income security? Yeah, then we get to defense, right? Generally speaking, that tends to be the number one thing that people expect the government to spend money on. And back in 1970, it was, right? What was 1970? Was there a war? Vietnam. In addition, it was also the beginning of the Cold War. Right, so this is where we started stockpiling weapons. So we spent a great deal of money creating a missile defense system that, in theory, we can, take big, huge ballistic missiles that have nuclear heads on them and ship them around underground on railroad tracks so that the Russians can't find them. If you go out in Kansas, there's a big, huge set of land that's dedicated to just missiles and then having them get transported from one missile silo to the other one, and you have to do it in secret, so that means you have to do it underground. I've seen some of those. Those are cool.
Wasn't some of the money also in trying to beat Russia to space?
That was the 60s, really, more than the 70s, right? 68's when we went to the moon, in theory. I mean, what comes next?
Education and health.
Right? They're paying me to educate you. Yay! I'm number 3. I'm number 3. All right. So again, don't memorize these sorts of things, folks. I mean, this is silly. I'm not going to ask you to regurgitate a pie chart to me. That's utterly and completely ridiculous.
Unless it's made of pie.
I love raspberry pie, in case you wondered. Do note that the percentage of our money being spent on our debt, though. Interesting little tidbit, right? Right? Our debt, we're only spending 6% of our GDP or 6% of our government expenditure on paying for our however many $1 trillion worth of debt we have. Think about 1970. Did we have lots of debt in 1970? Certainly not as much, right? But notice what percent of our government expenditures were on servicing our debt back in 1970. 9%. What the? I mean, right now, everyone's screaming about our debt, right? Were they screaming about it back in 1970? No, not even a little bit. So what the? Why is it an issue? Why are we screaming about it so much right now then?
We're paying so much.
Maybe they're lying, although I doubt it.
We're paying teachers more as well.
Again, the fact remains is that what were interest rates back in the 70s? They were in the double digits, folks.
Oh, were they?
Yeah, 70s were some high inflation time. What are interest rates right now? Yeah. The government, a 10-year government bond is going to pay 1.8% interest. 1.8%. That's how much the government has to pay in interest on the money it's borrowing. if you only had to pay 1.8% interest on the money you're borrowing, what would you do? Hell yeah! I mean, come on. If I was the U.S. government, I'd be cranking up the debt big time, right? Money's cheap. Go get it. So part of the reason why a lot of people are not necessarily all that worried about our debt right now is that our percentage that we're paying on servicing our debt not as high. So why not? Why worry about it? All right. That's an aside. We'll get to that a little bit more in Chapter 17. All right. Take a peek at the next page in your text where it talks about other countries and their percent of GDP coming from their governments. Why are all those other countries having such high percentages in government expenditures?
Because they have universal health care, don't they?
To some degree, they have universal health care, which means what kind of a political system do they have? They have a more socialist-based government. When you have a more socialist-based government, more of your companies are run by the government. Therefore, when the government spends money to invest in those companies, that's GDP expenditure, right? So socialism leads to higher percentages in government expenditures. And that's partially why people in America are so worried about our high percentage of GDP coming from government spending, is that what are we starting to look like? We're starting to look like France and Germany and Italy and all those socialist countries that we all hate. Right? Don't we?
Yeah, totally. So much.
But that is one of the things that people tend to worry about. All right, so there's government spending from a slightly world perspective. Not, again, like I said, don't memorize any of this stuff. I'm just trying to talk about it a little bit so you get some background. And when you go to a party and people start complaining about taxes and spending, you can, you got a little bit of, I know how much is spent by the government, right? It's mostly on this income security. You can start complaining about old people. That's the easiest thing to do at a party, right? I mean, 2 or 3 drinks into you just start talking about your parents and how crazy they are and how they're the one who is sucking all the money out of your wallet or whatever. Anyways, okay. So the other thing about government then is that they spend and they tax. Where does most of the government's money come from? Income taxes. And that's been pretty synonymous throughout time, right? So individual income taxes have almost always been somewhere between 45 and 50% of government collecting, all right? The one that has gone up has been this one, right? So this has always been 40 to 50%. This historically has been lower, right? It used to be 35. Now it's up to, what do they say it is, 42 or 44? So 40% of our taxes, the government collecting, is coming from Social Security and FICA. Note that how much are we collecting from businesses? What's our income tax collection? Only 9% of the government money comes from corporations. It doesn't seem like it's a whole terribly lot, and that we maybe should tax them more, but realize that our taxing rate at the corporate level is actually one of the highest in the world. Seems a little backwards, but it actually really is. All right, and then of course there's some others and excise taxes, which are import taxes. Basically, it's the taxes that foreign companies and countries pay to ship goods and sell in our stores. That's a very, very small amount. But these are the 2 biggies. All right, so that's where our money comes from, mostly from ourselves, which makes sense, right? And again, you may think that the U.S., we pay really high taxes, right? Turn the page. Notice average tax rates throughout the world. We are probably one of the least taxed countries in the world as individuals. There's obviously some smaller countries out there that tax less. Like if you go to a Dubai or to,
What about land taxes? Probably one of the highest, right?
You mean property taxes? Well, that varies from region to region too. I mean, there's a lot of states in the U.S. that don't have any property taxes, right? So I mean, it kind of, if you average it out, it's not too different than most of the rest of the world, actually. Then again, most of the rest of the world has land that's a lot more valuable than we do. We have more area, so we don't have to tax as much, technically, which is why it's not as a percentage-wise, that big a deal. All right, so realize again, note that if you're in the Swedish regions, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, all of those guys have tax rates that are way over 50%, right? I mean, this you pay, but they also have undoubtedly the best social network out there. Period. Right? I mean, if you work for 50 years, sweeping floors, you're gonna, when you retire, you're gonna be able to retire, and you will be just fine in Sweden and Norway and Finland. Right? You do that in this country, and yeah, hopefully you'll be able to keep doing it. All right. So taxes are an issue. Now, what I really want you to know from this chapter, these next two topics we'll talk about, and that's how taxes come about. So, how do we get new taxes? First of all, how often do we get new taxes? Do you think that your senator and your congressman are walking up to their jobs every day asking for new taxes for their citizens? They don't, period. Okay? I mean, it's very, very, very rare that we get new taxes added to our system because it is political suicide. So, how do we argue that we should have new taxes? Well, one of the ways that we argue is this one. Is a benefits received concept, right? The idea behind this is that you collect a tax to pay for the service you are collecting on. So wrap your brain around that a little bit and think, wait a second, you're paying for something and then you have to pay more so that you can have what you're paying for?
Is that like a luxury tax?
No, it's even worse than that. This is more along the lines of the number one thing that represents a benefits received tax is our gas tax. When you pay a gas tax, where does the gas tax get spent? The roads. That's absolutely right. Every penny you pay in gas tax is supposed to be sent to the states to update their roads and infrastructure, right? Pays for road updates. Period. I mean, that's what it's meant to be doing. The reason that you continually get more gas taxes added to your gasoline bill is because senators and congressmen at the state level drive around and they realize what kind of condition their roads are in. And when they see that they're real crappy, what do? They say, well, we need more money. So what do? They say, okay, state, are you willing to pay another, tenth of a penny tax on your gasoline so that we can actually get rid of all the potholes that are out there? And we as citizens tend to go, okay, we accept that, right?
Then we blame the president for the gas rates.
Yeah, then we blame the president for gas prices being too high. It tends to be our own fault. Some other ones that are like that. Airport tax. If you look at the price you pay for an airport ticket, there will be literally a surcharge on all of the tickets that you purchase that is called an airport tax. Again, guess what that airport tax is used to do?
Keep them flying.
Yep. Update terminals and runways. That's its job. Again, that's assuming that your airports are run by some sort of government level officials. So there's some that are county driven, there are some that are city driven, there are some that are actually state driven. It depends on which airport you're using, right? But there always has to be some sort of a tax to keep those up to date. And again, the idea here is that you're paying the tax so that what you're doing can continue to be done, all right? So this is the one that tends to work best currently. So over the last, say, 10 or 15 years, these are the only types of new taxes we've gotten. Very rarely do we get the other kind. And this is an ability to pay tax. The idea here is that if you have the money to buy this product, you should be willing and able to pay more on it, right?
So that's the one
That's the luxury tax, right? If you can afford this product, you can afford to pay a bit more.
That was really huge in the Renaissance.
Well, oh, yeah. I mean, that's how the government stayed afloat, because they didn't collect income taxes because they didn't know how. Right? So what the number one reason, one of these is the luxury tax, right? And I don't know if any of you have ever paid a luxury tax, right? If you buy a car, you have to spend more than $90,000 on the car to pay any luxury tax. If you buy a house, you have to buy a house that's worth more than $350,000 to pay luxury tax. But, you know, I mean, and those numbers have been going up and up and up, obviously, right? Luxury tax used to be on a house was more than $150,000, which, you know, nowadays that's the average house in Madison, right? So rich people complain about taxes just as much as poor people do, and so these numbers tend to go up just as much as anything else. All right, so these are the two ways that politicians will validate creating a new tax. They'll either say, well, look, if you're going to smoke, you should be able to afford to pay for additional taxes because you can afford to smoke, right? So, because it's not something you have to do, that's how they'll push through more cigarette taxes a lot of times, right? And now, actually, what they're trying to do with cigarettes is to start doing it as a benefits received tax. What are they saying smoking does to you? Causes lung cancer, which means that you're going to start having to be taken care of later on in your life. So if you add $1 tax per pack on a pack of cigarettes, that's going to pay for the health care of people in the future who are coming in for lung cancer treatments who can't afford it because, unfortunately, they smoked, right? So, again, this is how we try and sell taxes to the public. Don't, you know, good or bad, I don't know. This is just how it's done. So please know the different types of taxes or types of ways we argue for the taxes. Now, once we get the tax passed, then what the government tends to do, or even what we tend to do, is we lump the taxes into 3 different types. So 3 types of taxes once passed into law. So again, anytime you get new taxes, you have to have a new law to bring it in. And once that tax becomes law, then we have 3 types. The first type is a progressive tax. A progressive tax is any tax, right? This is any tax where the percent of income paid for tax goes up with higher incomes. I.e., if you make more money, you pay a higher percent of your income in this tax than someone who makes less. All right, now, the key to this phrase, and I'd like you to grab a different color in your notes and underline that, because percent of income, not the dollar amount itself, okay? It's percentage of your income. So someone else may pay more tax than you for a specific item. But if that amount you pay is a higher percentage for you than them, then technically that's actually you paying more than they are, even though they paid a higher number amount. Okay? And I'll show you an example of that here in a little bit once we get through all 3 of them. Okay, so progressive tax, essentially the idea here is the more you make, the more you're going to pay, right? Mm-hmm. So the next type is a flat, or often called proportional tax. And the idea here is that the percentage stays the same here. Tax is the same percent of income for all incomes. Again, this does not mean that everybody pays the same amount. It means that everybody pays the same percentage of their income, right? So there was a presidential candidate on the Republican side, however many years ago that was, who was claiming to say, let's have a flat tax rate, right? So instead of having income tax be what they are right now, let's make them flat, where everybody pays, wasn't it the 999 argument? Yeah, 9%. So you would pay 9% of your income in taxes, period, no write-offs, no nothing, just 9%, that's what you have to pay. Again, the idea here is that people who are making $1 million, they pay 9% of $1 million, which is a big number. If you're only making $10,000, if you take 9% of $10,000, much smaller number, okay?
Still a lot when you're only making $10,000.
I'll agree. All right, and then last but not least, the third type is a regressive tax. And this is the opposite of progressive. It's a tax where the percent of income is higher for lower incomes, i.e., the poor pay more as a percent of their income than the rich. All right. So now, examples of these types of taxes. What is the best example for a progressive tax in our country? Income tax. That's absolutely right. Personal income taxes. Right, this is one of the very few taxes where they say, how much money did you make? Based on how much money you make, if you made a whole bunch, you will pay a higher percentage, right? So anywhere from 10% for the first $9,000 that you earn, 5% for all the money that you make over $350,000 per year. All right, and again, the idea here is that the more you make, the higher percent you pay. On top of paying more, you're going to pay a higher percent, which makes it that much more on top of it, right? Hence the progressive concept. Flat taxes. Do we have any examples of a flat tax in our current economy?
Is it housing? Is it gas tax?
Let's do a gas tax. Let's think about gas tax, okay? Gas tax. So let's look at it. Gas tax. So let's assume that right now you're paying 10% on your gas tax, right? 10%. It's probably actually more than that if you add them all up. But let's imagine that for every gallon of gas you buy, you pay 10% on top of the price in taxes. All right, so my question to you, is that a flat tax, a regressive tax, or a progressive tax? All right, so let's think about it. Imagine, if you will, that you earn, say, $250,000 a year. And we'll compare that to someone who earns $50,000 a year. So, my question to you is, how much does somebody who's making $250,000 per year spend on gas tax per year? Well, I mean, what do you think a guy who's making $250,000 a year drives?
A Lexus.
Okay, so let's assume he's driving a Lexus SUV, which my neighbor has his and hers matching colors, white and black. Okay, so
That tells us where you live.
I have my neighbors have some nice cars and a nice house. They're nice people. They're nice. So,
Makes me on my will.
yeah, true. I keep trying to suck up to them. It doesn't work very well. But they're like, lawyer people that look at me and go, hippie scum and whatever. Anyways, okay, so they're earning $250,000. So they're driving a Lexus. How much does Lexus, what kind of MPG does a Lexus get?
I don't even think MPG is applicable in those cars.
Really? It's probably more like 20. What is the Google it for us, Kyle. What is a Lexus SUV MPG? They probably have a hybrid version of it by now, for all that I know. Oh, good Lord. For all of you extremely rich, health-conscious people. 20? Okay, so the question then is, how many miles does this person drive in a year?
Or how many miles they get driven around.
Some really rich people don't drive at all. 20,000
That's what I'm saying.
miles.
Really? They don't? You know some? Well, okay, but then someone else drives him, right? But he still has to pay for the gas.
Spend it on jet fuel.
So let's assume that let's say they spend, say, $20,000 a year in gas. I mean, that's way high. So how much do they pay in tax? What's 10% of 20,000? Okay, so they paid $2,000 in tax for the car that they drive. Okay, now let's go to the $50,000 year person. What are they driving?
They're walking.
they're
35 miles a gallon.
they're getting something that's getting 35 to 40 miles. Yeah, right. Are they spending 20 grand a year on? Nah. How much do you think they're spending though?
7.
Let's go 7. Let's go with an easier number. How about 8? 8%, or $8,000 in gas they spend. So how much do they pay in tax? $800. Okay, so who pays more in tax? The rich do, right? Look at them. They're paying $2,000 versus me that's only paying $800. What is that? What is that as a percentage of their income, though? Again, remember that regressive and progressive are defined as a percentage of their income, right? Because how much you pay is immaterial. Because if you're making $5 trillion a year, paying 20 grand in tax would be nothing, right? That's like bending over to pick up a dime. Right? For this, what's 800 divided by 50,000?
17%.
We're paying 18%. What's this guy paying? 2,000 over 250,000.
125.
These guys pay 8%. Who's paying more? The poor guy is, folks. Gasoline taxes are always regressive. Always. Because even, and notice, I even made the guy who is making less drive less than half of the other guy. Still doesn't matter. You're still paying 10 percentage points more in the gas tax than you are if you're rich. Right? Rich people could care less about gas tax. Right? They'll bitch and moan about it with you so that you all complain about the government instead of complaining about them. But the fact remains is that for them, paying gas tax, right? You know, this is 2 days' work for them. For these people, this is 2 months' work, right? I mean, flat percentage taxes on goods that people buy are always regressive. Always. Right? Anytime anybody talks about a sales tax, it's regressive. Period. Right? And that's always hurting the poor more than it's hurting the rich. So if you were going to say, let's start taxing clothes at 12% instead of 6%, right? Who's that going to hurt more? It's going to hurt the poor people more, right? Because they unfortunately have to continue to buy clothes. I mean, maybe we could just make that optional.
Woo!
Yeah, true. Winter might be tough. All right, so the key here is realizing that, again, it looks like, I mean, come on, gas is being taxed at 10% for everybody, right? That's a nice, flat, proportional tax. It's even, it's fair, right? No. Not even close, folks, right? So as the government starts talking about new ways to raise additional revenue, you will hear cities and states talking about how, well, we're going to have to raise, the sales tax rate. All they're doing when they do that is screwing the poor that much more. That's all they're doing, okay? It's, sales tax is, it's a pittance to the rich, right? I mean, they probably pay this and laugh all the way to the bank. Right? $2 grand compared to $250,000 is nothing. $800 to somebody making 50 grand a year, they're like, oh crap, I need to take out a third job, thanks, right? Try and pay for the taxes I'm going to have to pay. So, again, please let me point out to you that any percent tax on a product, right, as long as the product is being purchased by everyone, rich and poor, relatively the same, then it's a regressive tax, right? And the idea is that luxury taxes are not generally considered regressive because we as poor people are probably not going to go out and buy a Viper 2012 for $110,000 a year, or $110,000 period, right? I mean, so if you're going to buy one of those things, then you'll pay the tax. So luxury taxes are actually considered progressive because the percent of income that a poor person pays on it is 0 because they don't buy that shit. Right?
Nope.
If you're only making 30 or 40 or 50 grand a year, you're not going to buy something that's going to cost, 100 grand unless it's a house where you're going to pay for it for 30 years. All right? So these are the two topics I want you to understand, though. Benefits received, ability to pay, and the three types of taxes: progressive, flat and proportional, or regressive. All right? And as to which ones of these are good or bad, that's your choice.
So do we have anything that's flat tax?
No, not really. We were trying to, right? I mean, there were some presidents that were saying change our progressive income tax system, where the where the rich pay a higher percentage, to being a nice flat tax, so it's fair to those rich people, right? Because right now they're getting taxed way more than the poor people, and that's why they complain. Right? I mean, 35% to like 18%. I mean, think about that. If you were rich, wouldn't you be pissed? Yeah, I mean, look at all those poor people getting off on 14, 18% taxes. God, bastards. I pay for all of everything because I'm rich, right?
If those rich people had ever spent any time being poor, they probably wouldn't feel so bad about it.
That's potentially true. But the fact remains is that yeah, nothing really right now is flat, right? So if you ever answer that this is a flat tax on any of the quizzes or tests, I'm going to be sad. There really isn't anything out there. All right? All right. So, let's see.
So why don't people like a flat tax?
Oh, well, no, lots of people would like a flat tax. Well, the reason why, of course, is that who was the guy who was doing the... No, it was the pizza guy, right? What was his name? The guy who wanted the flat tax for instead of the current progressive tax rate. No. He was ahead for like a month, but the concept. I mean, it would be nice if it were fair, and I would even potentially agree that say a flat tax of say 20% would be okay if there was literally no way you could write anything off. Period. Right. There's tons of loopholes in our tax system, such that you're making millions and you only pay like you're making 100,000. Right. I mean, so it's is a flat tax doable? I mean, yeah, we could probably vote in a flat tax and even remove all the loopholes that exist. But what would happen as soon as the flat tax got voted in? What would happen? There would be new lobbying committees coming into play to say, oh, but these really, really, really rich people that have to pay 20%, oh my God, that's a hardship when they're making $1 billion. So if we need to start giving them a loophole, like if they have a fifth house, they should be able to write off all of the taxes on the fifth house that they bought or the third yacht that they purchased, right? I mean, right now in our loophole system, if you buy 5 houses, all of the interest that you pay on all of those houses is deductible on your taxes, right? I mean, and in fact, it actually behooves rich people to not pay their bills so that they continue to pay relatively high interest rates, because then they can write those things all off on their taxes, right? And then they just have to wait for inflation to go up, the value of those houses to go up, and then when they do sell them, they can collect all of that money on top of it, and then if you reinvest it in another house, again, all tax deductible, you don't have to pay any tax on it, right? It just... Yeah, we could. Yeah, if we would all pool our money together and just start buying really, really expensive houses, we could do it. We could probably only afford one, though, and it would be a mid-sized one. It's the classic argument that you have to have money to make money, right? And that is still pretty much a true argument here in this country, right? So the idea is for you all to get some money. Damn it, hurry up. All right. So. Okay, so the last part of chapter 16 talks about the public choice theory, or the way we are currently creating our taxing structure is driven by a whole bunch of politicians voting on issues to create taxes. Now, when a politician goes into politics, their goal is to be a public servant, right? Initially, right? Initially, yes. I honestly believe that even the people who came into office who were even actors prior to their lives, right, they came in there initially with an altruistic goal, right? I mean, Ronald Reagan was governor of California first, and he actually did some fairly decent work in California if you looked at it, right? Even Schwarzenegger, right? I mean, he certainly didn't need the money, right? He didn't need the benefits because he was going to have them forever. But, their goal is altruistic. Once they get into office, though, what happens? I swear to God that's true. Because essentially what happens is that politicians, unfortunately, follow the rule of capitalism. Me first. That's right. So once they get into office, you may think, and they may even have a good platform that states they're going to be looking out for the small person or helping the middle class or whatever the arguments that people sprout nonstop. But in the end, has Congress ever voted for a pay cut for themselves?
President Obama took a 5% pay cut.
That's true. I said Congress, though.
Oh, Congress. Ha! No.
Congress does not.
No.
Neither has the Senate. The Senate tried once. They actually had 42 votes for it, but it wasn't enough. You got to have 51. So they tried. But so part of it is that self-interest is involved. Right? Your elected officials care. And rightfully so, right? I mean, they care about their own family and their own welfare to some degree, and they have to. And so they look out. Sometimes they may look the wrong way or look the right way, depending on how you look at it, to get things that are going to be more helpful for them than necessarily everyone, right? How many people do you know that when they go to vote, the only thing they vote about is one specific issue? They don't care about anything else except the one thing that they care about, right? It's like, if you are going to get me a job, I will vote for you. If you are going to outlaw gay marriage, I will vote for you. If you are going to start banning abortions, I will vote for you. How many people do you know do that? That tends to be their way of voting. A lot of people are going to go out and do that. Is that necessarily a good way for you to rationally vote for the people that are... Yeah. So it's one of those where sometimes I wish they would ask you to take a test before they let you vote. The problem then is that voter turnout would be even less than it already is. I mean, for the last elections, they had 12% voter turnout for the spring elections? It was classic.
It's only going to get worse because we don't have any faith in our government system.
True, which is a bit of unfortunate. Or fortunate, depending on how you look at it, right? Because then the people who actually give a crap are the ones who are going to vote, and hopefully they will be educated in their voting. But that's not true because the lunatics who only care about one thing, they always come out, right? I mean... So again, is it good, is it bad? I don't know, right? What else is wrong with our government?
Yeah.
Not enough workers.
Yeah, we need to hire some more people. So the classic argument that I see floating around on Facebook every now and then is the government hired someone to do surveys of the Nevada desert, and that guy went out and started doing surveys on the desert, and he brought in a report to his governor and said, "Here's the report of the deserts in Nevada." In Nevada, and the governor said, "Wait, how can I trust your survey?" So what did he do?
Hired somebody else.
He made a committee of people to oversee the one person who was taking surveys of the desert, and then once they had a committee to oversee the surveyor, what did they have to have? They needed to have consultants come in and verify all of the data because the people who were voted into the committee didn't know enough about surveys to know whether or not the survey that the surveyor was doing was actually valid. So you needed consultants to come in and do all of that work. And then the government realized that they were going into debt and they needed to lay off some workers. So who did they lay off? The surveyor. But there was still a committee and a consultant checking his work even though he was gone. A classic Facebook story if you hear it, right? But anyways, that's another issue that we have with the public choice theory. And the other thing that we have to worry about, right, is I mean, who's running our public officials? Is it us? Is it our opinions that they're looking at and comparing opinion polls to determine whether or not they're going to vote for certain things on
Whatever the ads tell you to do, that's what you're supposed to do.
That's how it works a lot of times. Anyways, the public choice thing, I'm not going to quiz you over it just so that you know. I mean, I would hope that these are things you know about our political system, all right? So I'm not going to ask you what's wrong with it and
Is
Yeah.
everything an okay answer?
yeah, I know that's essentially what you should say. But I mean, again, there's issues with it, there's problems with it, but at the same time, it's unfortunately what we have, and that's what we have to do. All right, so there you go. That's chapter 16.
It was depressing.
All on one page. Woo.
Yeah, it's chapter 16 is kind of light on the material.
Light on the material, really depressing.
So the homework for chapter 16, just numbers 4 and 6. And this will be about stuff, about taxes, right? So what's a benefits received tax, what's an ability to pay tax, and then whether something is going to be progressive, flat, or regressive, all right? Some of those things that are inside of there you may need to do some research on to understand what they are. So please do that as needed, right? So when it talks about tax on Social Security benefits, look up how taxes for Social Security benefits are calculated so that you know how it's done, okay? It's kind of cool when you figure it out. Again,
Cool in your world or
I think even in yours, so that you know, because you want to know how taxing of Social Security benefits works, because then you can understand why rich people don't actually complain about it.
It's called knowledges, and I like it.
All right, so that's it. Take off. Get out of here. There will be a quiz over chapter 15 tomorrow or Wednesday, whenever the next day we meet is. If you have your chapter 15 homework in and would like to turn it in, I would love to have it. You do have until Wednesday, though, to finish it up if you need.